Welcome back to another episode of Whispers in the Warren. Tonight, we're going to continue on with our older Creepypasta series with It Has No Face. Everyone has tales about the strange and bizarre. My story is about how my half-whole mask saved my life and continues to save my life to this very day. Late in December, I was traveling north from California to my home state of Oregon. Nothing fancy. I was just going to visit family for the holidays. On my way north, I hit a small snowstorm. Nothing awful, just a lot of snow falling at once. I wasn't worried about the small increase of snow at first, considering I had snow tires installed before I started my long journey home. I did, however, get a little hesitant to drive when the snow started to really come down. The large amount of falling snow coupled with the large amount already littering the ground as I traveled higher into the mountains caused me to consider finding a place to stay for the night. I figured I could get some sleep while the storm passes over, that and the fact that I could give my car's heater a break before it would decide to burst into flames or worse, stop working altogether. I scanned as much of the landscape as I could, but there was no buildings in the immediate area. The only other option I had for my predicament was to keep driving and hope that there was a town or an exit nearby that I could take. I must have been driving for at least an hour before I saw a sign up ahead indicating how far the closest city was. My heart sank a little when I read 162 miles as it flew by my windshield and vanished into the snowy night. At this point, the snow was beating against my windshield, and I knew I wasn't going to last 162 minutes, let alone 162 miles. The digital clock on my radio read 1:21 a.m., and I decided that the next turnoff I saw I would take and hope that I could find a neighborhood that would produce some results on my current endeavor. My thought process was either freeze to death in my car or stay the night in some random person's house. Weighing the two options in my head, I picked the only thing a sane person would pick and go with the house. Another 30 minutes flew by and still no luck finding a place to pull off. Just when I was starting to lose hope, I saw a turnoff in the distance. A small shape started to make its way closer into my headlights, and upon further inspection, it was revealed to me that there were two wooden poles that possibly belonged to a fence. When I turned onto the road between the two wooden poles, the ground beneath me felt rocky and rough, like I was traveling on gravel. I didn't drive for too long before I started to see a small cabin creep into the field of view. The lights in the cabin were off, but the place seemed to be in good shape. I parked my car under a tall, wild-looking tree that took residence on the cabin's front lawn. Getting out of my car, I immediately grabbed my extra jacket and put it on, pulling the half-whole mask I wore around my neck to cover up my ears to keep the heat around my face. I put my cap on and trudged up to the cabin after putting my cap snug on my head. As I traveled through the cold, windy night up to what I felt was my salvation, I immediately regretted not getting any gloves for my hands. Despite the irritation I had with my hands, my face and the rest of my body were comfortably warm, so I didn't have much room to complain. I stuffed my frozen hands deep in my pockets and continued my journey across the cabin's lawn. As I made my way to the door, I noticed something odd. There was no indication of light anywhere. There wasn't even a car in the front yard. Taking my right hand out of my pocket, I knocked 3 times, waiting patiently before saying, "Hello? Is anyone there? I'm sorry to bother you so late at night, but I need a place to stay for a few hours." Nothing answered my plea for help, so I knocked 3 more times on the door, hitting my knuckles harder against the aged wood of the entrance. "Hello?" I said again, a little louder, before continuing with, "I'm not here to rob you or anything. I just need a place to stay for the rest of the night. I promise I'll be gone by sunrise." As I finished my sentence, I touched the ornate door handle, noticing that the door seemed to be unlocked. I said in a loud voice, "I'm coming in now. If there's anyone in there, please let me know." As I finished my sentence, I touched the ornate metal door handle, noticing that the door seemed to be unlocked. I said in a loud voice, "I'm coming in now. If there's anyone in there, please let me know." As I finished my sentence, I touched the ornate metal door handle. Noticing that the door seemed to be unlocked, I said in a loud voice, "I'm coming in now. If there's anyone in there, let me know now, please." I pressed the metal lever down, finding it a bit odd that the door was unlocked, and opened the door with little resistance on the other end, closing it behind me. Looking around the area, I noticed the cabin had 5 rooms. The living room, which was the biggest, a small kitchen, an even smaller washroom, and what I assumed were 2 small bedrooms in the back. No lights were on inside the cozy cabin, making it almost pitch dark if my eyes weren't already adjusted to the darkness from outside. I decided the best thing to do would be search for a light switch, so I took out my phone, turned on my flashlight app to scan the walls. My scan produced no results, however, and at risk of losing precious battery power on my phone, I decided the best option would be to turn off the light and put my phone on airplane mode. Before turning off my light, I studied the paintings hanging on the wall that I glossed over in the initial scan. Each painting that crossed my sights was just a typical landscape or harbors, things like that. There was a painting, however, that caught my attention. The painting was small and consisted of what looked like 2 adults, a mother and father, a teenage girl, and a small child. The family captured in that painting were wearing what looked like Victoria-era clothing. There was something really disturbing about the image in the painting, though. The faces of each member of the family looked like they were smoothed over with clay. I pulled myself away from the painting to take a glance at my phone for the time. My phone indicated that it was past 2 o'clock in the morning, so I decided to go to the back room to check to see if it was occupied. To my relief, the room was vacant besides a medium-sized bed, ornate dresser, and a nightstand there. Although there was no indication of a heating system besides the chimney, the rooms were bearable enough that I figured I could just bundle up in my clothes under the covers in order to stay warm. I was only going to be there for a few hours anyways, so there wasn't much point in starting a fire, plus the people who owned the cabin wouldn't be back tonight considering how late it was. I hopped into the worn-out bed facing the open door next to another door I assumed was a closet, pulled my half-whole mask completely up and over my face to make sure my head would stay nice and warm the rest of my stay. Pulling the fabric of my mask down slightly, I set the alarm of my phone for 4:30 a.m., put it back down onto the nightstand. I covered my face again and bundled up tightly with the sheets, closing my eyes and letting dreamland take me until I woke after what felt like minutes later to the sound of scratching. My body froze as I heard the noise over and over, softly coming from the closed door. I tried to relax myself by thinking of all the noises that I heard was just a rat or some other animal that was spending the night in the closet while the cabin's owners were away. Quietly, I shifted onto my back, pulling my half-whole mask down slightly so a little slit appeared, giving me a small window to look out at what was there. I laid on the bed, stiff as a board, with my cap and mask covering my face in such a way that it acted like a visor, giving me a small peek at what was in the darkness. Thankfully, my eyes were still adjusted to the dark, which gave me a small amount of reassurance as I continued looking in the direction of the scratching noise was coming from. The scratching noise continued louder and louder for what seemed like minutes until just like that, it suddenly stopped. Silence filled the room again, but it wasn't a safe kind of silence. The deafening silence in the room was a foreboding, ominous sort of silence. The vacuum of sound in the air was the type of silence that happens in a movie just before something jumps out at you. Just when I began to calm myself down, the doorknob to the closet began to jingle and turn very slowly. My heart began racing out of my chest as I saw and heard that knob turn, and every inch of my body wanted to bolt out of the bed and out of the cabin before whatever was on the other side of that door got out after me. I laid perfectly still on the bed, despite the fact that I had a cocktail of adrenaline, nerves, and instinct telling me to get the hell out of there. My eyes widened as the door to the closet opened slightly, and I saw what looked like a dried head attached to an elongated neck pop out of the opening, followed by a skeletal body. The thing that was emerging from the closet crawled on all fours out of the doorway and slowly made its way to the bed I had been sleeping in. I had never been more frightened in my entire life as the thing stood up, almost touching the roof of the cabin, and looked down in my direction. The creature stood there, studying me as I peeked through the thin slit in my mask, pure terror swirling around in my mind as I glanced up at the body of the creature. Looking at the creature's skeletal face, I noticed it had no eyes in its eye sockets, which led me to believe that it could not see me even though I could see it. Just when the idea of not being able to see it was starting to give me a little comfort, the creature began to speak. Strange. The creature whispered softly as it continued to watch me, and then began to speak again. It has no fear of me. The creature continued to say in a hoarse tone as it began to breathe loudly, continuing to look at me, gripping down on the edge of my bed. Feeling the creature's bony hand touch the edge of my bed caused my brain to go into complete panic mode. The only thing that stopped me from jumping up was the thought that maybe the creature believed I was dead or asleep and wouldn't attack. How can it not fear? How can it not fear me? The thing said through clenched teeth before loudly gasping and suddenly pulling back with its mouth open in an expression that appeared to be fear. It has no face, the thing whispered to itself as it continued to back away. It has no face, the creature said again, but this time louder than before and slightly more threateningly. It has no face, the creature shouted as it backed off further away from the bed. I heard the thing breathing loudly and quickly before calming down and slowly returning to the side of the bed. Leaning over me slowly, the creature continued to look at me before softly beginning to breathe on my face. I could smell its foul breath even through my mask. The smell was so powerful that it took all of my strength not to gag as a reflex to the awful stench. In my mind, I made the choice to keep motionless and not do or say anything that could compromise whatever illusion I was giving the thing that was currently studying me. The creature breathed on me again softly. The stench I smelled from its breath could only be described as pure death, which only strengthened my resolve to stay perfectly motionless. Strange, the thing whispered at me again, leaning in close to me to the point where I could smell its decaying flesh. The creature slowly reached for me, its hand slowly moving towards my face. With every inch that decaying hand moved, I couldn't help but feel my situation becoming more and more dire. The thought that this was it for me. The creature would kill me tonight or take me away and torture me and then kill me, and no one would know what happened to me. No one would find my body out here. No one would know my story. I could feel tears start to swell up in my eyes as I thought of everyone I ever loved being yanked away from me in this one moment. No face. No face. No face. The creature softly chanted as its hands crept ever closer to my face. I could hear the anguish in the creature's voice as it continued chanting over and over as it reached for me. As the creature's long, bony hand crept only centimeters away from my face, I braced myself for the worst, making the last thoughts I would ever have be about people I loved. Just as I thought my life was all over, a sudden loud noise erupted from the room, filling the ear closest to the nightstand with a flood of beeps and causing the creature to scream and jump back. As the noise continued, the creature threw itself back against the wall, shrieking uncontrollably in terror as it stumbled back towards the closet. I was dumbstruck for a second before the thought came to me that I had set my alarm for 4:30 a.m., which must have been the source of the noise. I jumped out of bed, grabbing my phone, pointing the lit screen at the monster as the alarm continued to ring loudly. The loud ringing caused the monster to shriek even more in confusion and terror as it retreated quicker as I approached. Seeing my chance, I activated my phone's flashlight and put it on strobe in order to disorient the monster further. No face! No face! No face! The creature shrieked at me as it withdrew to the safety of the closet. I continued to shine my light on the creature, and for added effect, I started playing loud music as I continued to jab my phone in the monster's direction like a lion tamer. The thing threw itself into the dark recesses of the closet, and I shoved the door back, locking it after I slammed it closed. The shrieks coming from the monster started to get fainter and fainter, as if it was retreating deeper into the house. No face, no face, it has no face. I could hear the creature yell as it got further and further away. After hearing the last retreating words of the thing that terrified me the whole night, I bolted from the cabin at breakneck speed, jumping into my car, flooring it off the gravel road. I was shaking all over as I drove, and when I pulled my half-whole mask further down, my exposed skin was as white as the snow that littered the ground. I was so frightened by the whole experience as soon as I saw the first town. I parked my car and began to sob uncontrollably. The experience that I had just been through would scar me for life, but as I wept in my car in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven, I couldn't help but start to laugh a little in between my fits of crying. I got through my ordeal without so much as a scratch on me. I entered the store, sniffling, wiping away the rest of my tears. As I continued into the store, the cashier looked up at me, traced my direction with his eyes before continuing with what he was doing. The store was mostly empty besides an elderly couple. I was the only one in there. Had a rough night? The cashier said, with one eyebrow cocked up while he scanned my items. You have no idea, I said, looking out the window at the sunny winter day. I noticed you looked a bit upset when you came in. What happened? Did you get dumped or something? He said, looking up at me as the register computed how much I owed him. Looking at the young man behind the register, he seemed to be a little younger than I was. I looked at the cashier's name tag for a second before feeling that I had nothing to lose by telling him about the night I had just had. The small name on his ID tag read Evan. As I finished telling him my frightening tale, something odd happened. I expected him to burst out laughing or say I was the best liar he had ever talked to. Instead of doing any of that, Evan just stood there, his skin milk white, as he stared at me with an expression so horrified. Evan, are you all right? I said, looking into his eyes while we both stood there quiet. What? Oh, yeah, it's just... Evan began to say before his thoughts trailed off due to a new feeling that we were both being watched. I began to feel eyes burning into the back of my head before turning around to see the old couple I glanced at when I entered the store before. The old couple possessed the same horrified look that Evan had had just a few seconds ago. They must have heard the entire story I told. After a few moments of silence, the odd couple asked me what I knew about the cabin, to which I couldn't really say. I gave them the best description I could about what I had seen. The couple proceeded to tell me about the cabin, how long it's been there, and that it's haunted by a presence so terrifying that the place was condemned and left to rot away after so many people disappeared there. They told me that no one who ever stayed in that cabin has ever been seen alive again, if they've ever been seen at all after their visit. One of my best friends stayed the night in that cabin, Evan said quietly as he stared off into the distance but continued with his thoughts. I refused to go into the cabin. I knew something bad would happen if we went in. I tried so hard to convince him that the dare was stupid and to not go in, but he refused to be labeled a chicken and continued with the dare. Evan's eyes began to water as he continued with his story. I never saw him again after that night. I kept calling his house, but his parents still couldn't find him. We put out flyers, billboards, but we never had any luck. After a few days, we contacted the police, and I told them about the cabin. Evan began to choke down tears as he clenched his fist. They found him in the basement of that cabin, sprawled out on the floor. His eyes surgically removed from the eye sockets. His nose was removed and his lips were sliced off. When they found him, he was naked with an incision from the bottom of his ribcage to his pelvis. All of the internal organs were extracted from his body. But you want to know the worst part of all of it? When the police did an autopsy on the body, they found that he was alive during the whole process. Evan winced as he remembered the whole gruesome story and said, "They never found who did it or what did it. There was no DNA evidence, and they couldn't find the tools that made the incision. They couldn't find anything. Evan clenched his fist tighter on the table before the old man, listening to our conversation, put his hand on Evan's shoulder to reassure him that it was going to be all right. As he comforted Evan, he looked at him and said, "People have been disappearing from that area for decades, maybe even centuries, but the bodies always end in the same gruesome way. I don't care who you are, no one deserves something like that happening to them. They should just torch that evil place to the ground." The old lady joined her husband's side and looking at me with the most foreboding face I've ever seen. "If your story is true, you should consider yourself the luckiest man on earth. In all my years of living, you are the only one to go into that cabin and come out alive," gripping onto her husband's hand tightly as she spoke. After hearing the old woman's words, I realized that Evan said the body of his friend was found in the basement, which explains why the monster's voice got fainter. It would have pulled me into that basement if my phone hadn't gone off. I quickly paid for my items and left the store more troubled now than when I entered. Feeling drowsy due to the lack of sleep and constant adrenaline rush caused by my whole terrible ordeal, I decided to go to a hotel and spend the day sleeping and relaxing to get my mind off things. That night, I sat on the bed in my hotel room and looked at the 2 items that saved my life. In one hand, I gripped my half-whole mask, which hid my face from the terrible monster. In my other hand, I held my cell phone, which scared away the horrible beast that could have killed me. I decided from that day on, I would always wear my half-whole mask to bed. It saved my life. That's the least I can do for it. This recent brush with death I just experienced had taught me that life is too precious to waste, so I decided to ask out my best friend Samantha on a date, and things have worked out perfectly. Samantha and I were together for 2 years before I recently asked for her hand in marriage, which she said yes. Part of me will never forget that awful night, and because of it, not only have I been wearing my half-whole mask to bed every night since then, but I've also made it a priority to not live in any type of house with a basement. As an added safety measure, I started locking every door before going to bed. It's a pain, but you can never be too careful. Despite these crazy precautions, Samantha has accepted my little quirks and has continued to be supportive as we continue our journey through life together. I couldn't be happier with the way things turned out in my life, and I'm so lucky to be with Samantha. Everything is perfect. There's just one thing that bothers me, and I think I may have to just blame my imagination. But sometimes when I wake up at night, when it's really quiet, sometimes I'll hear soft scratching noises. And also, I think this is just the paranoia, but I swear sometimes I hear something whisper, "No face," from inside my closet. I hope you enjoyed tonight's story. I'll see you next time. Good night.